Hello there, my name is Martin Henley. This is the Effective Marketing Content Extravaganza. And if you're new here, you couldn't possibly know that I am on a mission to give you everything you could possibly need if you are looking to be more successful in your business. Providing, of course, what you need to be more successful in your business is to know more about and be implementing more enthusiastically, efficiently, and effectively sales and marketing in your business, which is, of course, what you need. You need more customers more profitably. That will give you more invoices, higher invoices, better profitability, nicer holidays, nicer car, nicer house, nicer retirement. All the good things that you deserve because you're the hero that decided to run your own business. Now, what goes on here is I'm here giving you everything I know about sales and marketing. That happens on a Monday. That's the What the series. On a Tuesday, I pull in anyone I can find with experience to share with you if you're looking to be more successful in your business through sales and marketing. That's Talk Marketing. On a Wednesday, every other Wednesday, Melanie Farmer comes through and we speculate wildly about what's going on in the marketing news and what it might mean for you in your marketing life, in your business. And on the other Wednesday, I review so you don't have to. On a Thursday, occasionally, I'm here thinking out loud. And on a Friday, we review or react to the very best and the very worst of marketing content on the internet. So if that sounds like it might be interesting or useful, please God tell me it does. We're only here to be interesting and useful. Please take a second to like, share, subscribe, and comment, because that will give us the motivation to continue on this epic journey. Now, if you're tuning in as this goes live, it will be a Tuesday, which means we have a guest for you. And today's guest has web experience going back to 1998. Since then, he has been a website manager with Sussex Enterprise and Wired Sussex. He was user research and UX director at No Pork Pies and user research director at Fresh Egg. He has been an organizer, curator, and workshop manager at UX Camp Brighton since 2013 and co-organizer of UX Up since 2020. He has been a freelance UX consultant and trainer since 2014 and is also currently senior UX researcher at Clearleft. Nobody introduced today's guest. Today's guest introduced himself, and today's guest is Luke Hay. Good afternoon, Luke.
Good afternoon. How's it going?
I am extraordinarily well, thank you, man. How are you?
Good, yeah, all good, thanks, all good.
Excellent. I'm kind of interested to have this chat because this whole, my whole YouTube thing didn't really start, but got triggered because somebody told me that they once paid £10,000 to a CRO consultant for an hour of consultancy. And I knew what CRO was, but in that second, I didn't know for a second, but I couldn't imagine what it possibly was that CRO was, that they paid £10,000 for an hour's consultancy. And that's why I started with the What the series to define all this jargon, because I'm thinking if I don't know, then who knows? But UX and customer research, which is where you are, I think is really interesting. And what else do I think it is? I think it's something else. It's a bit kind of mysterious, isn't it? I've kind of got a feeling that it's not all it's, they say, egged up to be. That's not the phrase, is it? It's not all that it's not worked up to be. I don't know. So I'm really interested to have this conversation. The other reason I'm interested to have a conversation with you is because you and I were clearly working the same orbits for like a long time around Brighton, so Melanie Farmer comes through and does the news with me every other week. She's based in Australia now. You probably won't know that. You know Melanie Farmer. You know Jim Cunliffe. You know Steve Bustin. It's like you know everyone I know, but we don't know each other, which is weird.
No. It's a pleasure to meet you.
It's a pleasure to meet you too as well. Okay, super cool. So the thing that struck me about your CV is you've been 98 was early to be a web manager, wasn't it? Or managing ISPs or whatever it was you were doing. Were you like the first website manager?
Yeah, I guess more or less. I mean, I got into it all by accident. Then I just went for a job at a web agency without even really knowing what a web agency was, just after kind of leaving college. And then kind of stuck around ever since, really.
Okay. And it's interesting because it's changed a lot, hasn't it, since 1998? I mean, 1998, that's when you were waiting like 10 minutes for a picture to download.
Yeah.
So it's changed enormously. And it's weird because looking back, it feels, I mean, I don't know, but it feels to me like there hasn't really been a big change, maybe since social media in the mid kind of noughties until now. Like AI has just actually blossomed in front of our eyes in like the last 3 months. Um, so it's interesting that kind of journey. That's interesting. I don't know what the question is. Discuss.
No, no. I mean, just kind of to think back to then, because see, plenty of people probably won't remember back then. You know, particularly I speak to a lot of young people in the UX scene and sort of help them get into UX. And 1998 to them, you know, some of them are barely even been born then. So yeah, it is a while ago. But like something like 10% of households in the UK had the internet back then. Even as you say, you know, it was dial up and it was slow, but only about 10% of homes even had the internet. So yeah, massively different kind of place we're in now. I mean, it was like the Wild West back then, really. You know, people were just making things up as they went along, really.
100%. And the thing is, since 2008, I've been kind of teaching marketing, training marketing. Since about 2011, 2012, I've been a lecturer with the Digital Marketing Institute. But what qualified me to do that is that I was one of those people in the noughties who was banging their head against the wall until it was bloody, trying to get things to work. So it seems to me then, like especially in 1998, when everything took forever to happen, they could have really used some UX, and there was none. There was
Yeah.
absolutely none. I think what was keeping people away was the geekiness of it, like the technicalness of it, maybe, or the
Hmm.
technicality of it. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. It was run. The internet was basically run by the geeks, by the tech side of things back then. You know, there wasn't much in the way of, well, there isn't really anything in the way of sort of UX side of things, and you know, to some extent there was still marketing, I guess, as well, but it was mainly run by the geeks because you had to be a geek to really understand what it was and get involved back then. So it was a different landscape.
Yeah, or even just to drive a browser, just to search the internet
Hmm.
was because we're talking pre-Google, aren't we? When was Google? 2003,
Yeah,
2004.
something like
So
that.
is it like Netscape?
That
When
was one of
was
the early ones.
yeah? I remember having to call. I don't know who they were. It was during. You're a football fan, aren't you? During one of the
Hmm.
European Cups, I had to call my ISP, and the guy's name was Alan Shearer. And Alan Shearer was actually in the England team playing. Was that 96? I don't think it was 96. I don't know when it was.
The
Maybe it
European
was.
Championships were '96. Yeah.
It was 96. So maybe it was a World Cup. Maybe it was 98. I don't know. So I was one of those 10% of homes that had the internet, but it didn't work. It really didn't work.
No, it was
So,
more worth back then, but yeah, you know, good
yes,
time to get into it.
it was a good time. So I think the question is then, is there anything that, like, because you've been involved, we are talking now 2023, we're talking 25 years. Is there
Yeah.
anything that you learned at the very beginning that's still valid today, or is it all, has it, or not?
That's a great question. Probably not much. I mean, I think things that were learned over time was, I think what the learning curve was in the first couple of years was really just kind of asking what the point of it is, because for the first couple of years it seemed like no one asked, oh, what we should have a website. Oh, well, why? What's it going to do? You know, who's it for? That kind of thing. No one really seemed to be too bothered about that. It was just like, oh, let's have a website because that's the thing to do. So I think that's the only thing going through that period of like learning that. That's the real sort of basic fundamentals of UX in a way of actually, yes, you've got a website, but what's it for? Who's going to use it? Those kind of things that weren't really thought about back then, but sort of came in over maybe the first few years really of my career.
Yeah, because the adoption was just insane, wasn't it? If,
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
yeah, because in those days, what you had to have the internet in your house was it was a significant investment. Yeah, it's
Certainly.
insane.
Then obviously
Anyway,
you had
let's bring
to
some order to this because we're not here to reminisce about 1998 and
do that all
Alan
day.
Shearer working for. I wish I could remember the name of the ISP. It was a big one around the 2000s. I can't remember.
No,
I really can't
probably
remember.
no longer with us though.
Oh no, I hope he is. It was like 25 years ago, I'm sure, 22 years ago.
I mean the company generally, not the
Oh no, the
not the
company's not
tech.
with us anymore, I'm sure. No, they're not. They're not with us anymore, I'm sure. I hope both of the Alan Shearers continue to be with us
Yeah.
for a long time to come. Okay, cool. So let's bring some order to this. As you know, there are only 5 questions. So the first question is, how are you qualified to talk to us about your specialist subject? We'll nail down what your specialist subject is in a second. The second question is, who do you work with? How do you add value to their lives? The third question is, what's your recommendation for people who are looking to get better at your specialist subject? Question number 4 is, what should people read, or what content should they consume? And question number 5 is, who can you throw under the bus who might enjoy or maybe just endure to have a conversation like this with me? So as I understand it, your specialist subject is user research and user experience. So when we talk about user experience, when we talk about UX, we're talking about user experience. So maybe we should start. The first question is, how are you qualified to talk to us about those things? But we can test how you're qualified by asking you for a definition first. What is user research? And then what is user experience?
Okay, so if it's okay, I'll do that the other way round probably, because user research is more sort of part of user experience.
Is
So
that user
I start
friendly,
off,
though, to do it the other way around?
yeah, it's fine. It makes much more sense.
Okay,
Um,
cool.
so yeah, user experience is essentially it's about just how people interact with things. So that could be real life physical objects, but most of the time when we talk about it, and certainly my career is all about digital products essentially. So websites, apps, software, that kind of thing, and it's about understanding the people behind these things. Going back to the point I was making before, when you built a website, did you build it thinking about who's going to be using it and what they want to do with it, or did you just build something that you wanted to kind of get out into the world? So it's about looking at the perspective of the thing you're putting out there, the website, an app, software, from the point of view of the people who are going to be using it. It's kind of as simple as that, really. And then the user research thing is a big part of that, obviously, because that then to build something for someone, you really need to understand them. You need to understand their needs, their motivations, what they actually want to get from it, how they're thinking, that kind of thing. So that's a very, very brief description of the two.
Okay, don't worry. We're digging into this. It's going to be a much longer description. Good. So I'm tempted to tell you everything I know about user experience. What did we used to call it before it was user experience? Was it called something else?
Not really. I mean, there's obviously been parts of it that have been happening around because there's sort of there's elements of psychology to it. Marketing even there was elements of it within marketing, but as an overall sort of thing, it wasn't really around before then. It wasn't as its own discipline. It didn't really exist. I mean, you had obviously the design side. You had sort of website design rather than UX design, but yeah, essentially it's been something that's really just formed in the last, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years, really, in terms of the mainstream.
Okay, good. So I'm ready to tell you everything I know. I read
Go
Don't
for it.
Make Me Think by Steve Krug. I
Hmm.
read The Big Red Fez by Seth Godin. And I think I read Don't Make Me Think, like revisited, the longer version.
Yeah.
So what I know about user experience is that your action button should be burnt orange. People don't aren't like the premise of Don't Make Me Think is people are like sharks when they're online. I don't know if this is still the case. They just don't want to stop. So you've always got to lay out like the journey in front of them. What else do I know? Like call to action words like now's a strong word, free's a strong word, but maybe it's a bit spammy. Um, I think that's everything I know about user experience. I might know a little
That's
bit more about user research. So
hmm.
the question I have is, once you know those 5 things, what
Did you know
else
it
could
all?
you possibly need to know about user experience? Make your buttons orange,
Yeah.
put buy now buttons everywhere. Surely you don't need to know any more than that, do you?
Well, that's where the user research comes in, really, because of course your orange buttons. I mean, first of all, as you know, it's going to take more than an orange button to make someone buy a thing. You know, that might help. That might give you a slight edge over a red button or whatever, but it won't necessarily change things dramatically. You really need to know what they want, and that's where the user research comes in. So there isn't really hard and fast rules for designing for people because, of course, you're designing for different people in different circumstances as well. So yes, the orange buttons might work for one audience on one particular website, but they might not work at all for another audience on another website. So that's where you really need to do that research, and you need to be doing sort of usability testing and that kind of thing as well. You know, you need to be testing out in reality, which I mean, I didn't want to get into the button color debate because it's obviously a lot more than that. But you know, you need to be testing these things, whether it's the color of a button or the overall design of your website. But I think it's more important. The main thing is the sort of "Don't make me think" from Steve Krug's book. You know, that I think is a really core message and is still the case that when someone comes to your website, they're not going to be really wanting to have to consider what they want to do, where they want to go. Everything should just be seamless and effortless and frictionless, really. You know, they should be able to navigate around easily. They should be able to find the information they want easily, and they should be able to have that experience that's just sort of nice and natural and easy.
Yes, 100%. I think that. Okay, so two questions. Well, then, because you get mixed messages, like, so for example, for a long time, everyone was saying nothing should be more than 3 clicks away from the homepage.
Mm.
And then there was a school of thought that was saying the more people have clicked, the more invested they are, the more likely they are to convert to something in the journey and stuff. So there's that. The question that I have is, how different are people really when we're online?
Um, I think people are different in as much as obviously you're engaging in a very different way than you are in the physical world. But the principles are still the same, right? You know, you want to make things easy for people whoever they're doing it. So, you know, if you're in the supermarket, you don't want everything sort of scattered all over the place. You want, you know, the same sort of products in the same sort of place, and people know where to expect them. And it's the same for websites. So yes, there is an element of people are perhaps less patient online because everything else is just a click away, and that's the difference as well. Of course, that the competitor is just a click away online, whereas you know if I want to go to a different supermarket, I might have to go over the street or over the other side of town. Whereas obviously, if you're online, you can just click and go to the competitor rather than being on the site you're on. So I think you do have that little bit more, a little bit less rather attention span online, and you do kind of need to grab people. But again, it depends what your website is. You know, if you're looking to make quick sales, then that's one thing. But if you're looking to provide information and provide a more rounded experience for people, then it's a slightly different approach.
Yes, because this is another thing that kind of, I don't know, is it perceived wisdom or received wisdom? Where, and this is something that Steve Krug says in his book, is that everyone says everyone's in a huge rush when they're online, but we're all spending hours and hours and hours a day online. Do you know what I mean? It's not like we're in a rush to go somewhere else necessarily. So I think his point was that you have to keep confirming to people you're in the right place, you're going in the right direction, you're on the right road. Um, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's really interesting. So I suppose in its purest form, like UX in its purest form would be like a landing page where there literally is one thing that you want them to do, and the question is, how do you get them to do that one thing specifically? Is that where it works, or is that the most condensed kind of version of UX, or is that more CRO? I wonder.
I'd say that, and that's a really good point. Actually, there's sort of the difference between CRO and UX because CRO. I mean, I used to work for a while as sort of a conversion strategist and CRO director, and it's quite. There's obviously a big overlap, but CRO is more of a sort of almost like a marketing sales focused version of UX. So that is much more focusing on kind of the right buttons and getting people to do things as sort of quickly as possible and that kind of thing, the buy now, urgency messaging, that side of it.
Yeah.
Whereas UX is looking more more long term, looking more at that overall engagement and experience. Because of course, you can sell lots of things, but if you're effectively tricking people into buying them, or you're using techniques that aren't going to endear people to you and your company, then you're not necessarily going to have that long term effect. It can have a really negative impact on your brand. There's lots of brands out there that don't have great reputations because they kind of perhaps try and sell things to people in a very aggressive way, maybe. So,
Okay.
having those big pop ups of buy now and subscribe to our newsletter and that kind of thing, they can be effective, but, are they giving that long term user experience up? Is that person just going to be annoyed with you and not come back? So that's a simplified version of it. But yeah, UX is looking at the broader, longer term, wider experience that someone has and considering all their sort of needs and motivations, whereas CRO is literally just about trying to convert more and trying to sell more.
Okay. So there's a morality to this, is there? There's a right way to
There's a,
do this and there's a wrong way to do this.
there's an element of that, yeah. So there's something called dark patterns, which I don't know if you're familiar with at all, but that's an interesting kind of technique that people can use, which is a way of essentially tricking people online into doing something they didn't necessarily mean to do. So using design to kind of deceive them, and that could be something as simple as having a tick box to subscribe to a newsletter and sort of saying, tick this box if you don't want to subscribe to our newsletter, and keeping that really small so people sort of automatically think, oh, I'll tick that because I do want the newsletter, and trying to con them essentially in that way, or having a checkout button and adding something to their cart, an extra donation or something like that as they go through the process without them kind of realizing. And people do that all the time, and it's a fine line, as you say, it's a moral line even between what is just kind of reasonable and good marketing and sort of tried and tested sales techniques, and what is a bit more kind of deceptive.
Yeah, because you trigger me when you use the words brands have bad reputations. Because I
Hmm.
struggle to find a brand with a decent reputation these days. Like
Well,
I've
that's
just
true.
got like a child got hold of my tablet and managed to spend £80 on the worst conceived game you've ever imagined on Google Play. And Google
Wow.
don't want to give me the money back, and PayPal don't want to give me the money back. And it's like clearly, no, I'm sure you can buy like a really nice game for £80, and this one isn't. So
Yeah.
it seems to me like from the top to the bottom, there are lots of people. Like if Google are doing it, then everyone's doing it. I think. Okay, so that's interesting. That's really interesting. Um, so okay, so here's. Are you ready for a challenging question? It feels challenging.
Mm. Go for it.
Um, I'll put it in the most challenging way now. I've said it's challenging. Who cares? Is the question. Like, surely, if you are in the business of user experience or CRO, then surely the point is just to be making money through your digital products, through your websites. So, shouldn't there just be a big book of these are all the things you do to get people to push the right buttons? And then everyone know that, and they're not, but this is really challenging, there not be any need for a UX consultant or trainer. Like, why isn't it all written down in one book? I think I know what the answer is going to be.
Well, yeah. So first of all, there are books. There are quite a few books along those lines already. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend them, but there are a lot of things around like that. I think there's what makes people click and that kind of thing, which has got some of the psychology and some of those sort of tricks behind. I say tricks, some of the techniques behind getting people to convert more. But I think the main thing is that it doesn't work. None of these things work universally. Even when you're looking at CRO, I work with lots of different websites of different household names selling the same sort of things, and what works for one might not necessarily work for the other. And that's why in CRO there's a lot of A/B testing, because you're testing one design against the other design. And actually, although there are a few sort of fundamental tried and tested things that do tend to work, there are others that just won't, and that depends on the circumstances. For example, work with quite a few big charities here in the UK, and some of those, you don't want to be they morally don't want to be overly aggressive when asking for money, but some techniques will work for some charities that won't work for others. So some might sort of having negative messaging, showing all the the sad donkeys or whatever, if you're an animal charity and getting people to donate for that, that might work for them. But the other charity might work better if they're showing, happy donkeys, they're showing the success of their charity and that side of things. So there isn't necessarily a universal thing that this one website will convert for all different audiences and all different product types. So I think that's a big part of it, definitely. And then, as I say, there is that longer term brand impact of actually, particularly if you are a charity, you don't want to be really aggressive and conning people into giving you more money, even if it's for a good cause, because of course, that's not going to reflect well on you. So there is that consideration as well.
There is that consideration. Okay, so now you've piqued my interest. Now you're going to have to give me an example of two types of people who respond very differently. So probably, because I know you don't want to talk about it, so we're going to talk about it. So probably who clicks on a burnt orange button and who doesn't? Mm-hmm. That's what I'm interested to know.
I'm not sure I've got an answer to that one specifically, but I think people are very, very different. So there's obviously a lot more than two types of people. So you might have an example where someone's clicking on something because they've got really low tech skills. It could be, I don't want to say my mum, but it could be my mum who's, clicking something because she's not even entirely sure where it's going to take her or what's going to happen with it, but she's kind of clicking around. So that's obviously a really bad example because someone can get completely tricked into doing a thing. It can be, again, not so much a type of person, but the context they're in. It could be that someone's really short on time or they're really desperate for a thing. So, they just want to get there as quickly as possible. I mean, we kind of consider different mind states of people as well, that it might be the same person, but on one day they might want to click through and buy the thing straight away. But on another day, they might be in the more sort of researching mode themselves and might just be wanting to look around. So it's about, serving all of those needs as best you can in the same way, because not everyone's going to come to your site and buy your thing straight away, no matter what colour your buttons are.
No, you just gotta have burnt orange buttons. That's all anyone needs to know.
If it was that simple, then
we'd all be you wouldn't be in business. That's the problem. If it was that simple.
No, that's true. All right, I made my millions years ago off orange buttons.
So, okay, good. So I am understanding. Right. So it's because people are different, or they're in different states, or one day they might be on their desktop, the next day they might be on a mobile device. All of these things come into play when you're thinking about user experience. And the answer is you need to think about this a lot. There are no hard and fast rules because people are different, and even the same people come in different states on different days. Okay, so it makes sense. So what you're not doing is like a blanket, this is what we want from everyone who visits the website. What you're doing is actually trying to cater for as many of those people as possible in all those different states. That really is what user experience is.
Yes, I mean, there's two examples that I can give in terms of the type of artifacts that we use in user experience. So one is a customer journey map, or a user journey map, or experience journey map, where you're actually showing the end-to-end experience that someone might have. Now, if you're just a website selling some quite cheap things that people come and they buy the thing, then that's not really as relevant there. But let's say you're a university. I work with quite a lot of universities. Obviously, the process someone goes through from kind of deciding which university to go to, or if they want to go to university, what course they want to take part in, the application process, all of this thing happening. You're talking about a process that even to sign up to the course takes, a year or two of thinking and various things going on. And also they're then spending, £20,000 a year or whatever it is these days to actually undertake that course. So it's a really monumental decision for them. So mapping out their journey in terms of, okay, at this point of the year, they're likely to be considering which universities to apply to, that kind of thing. Obviously, that experience is massively different to someone buying a mug off Amazon or whatever it might be. So that's the other thing. They're very different things that people are trying to do online. So that's like the the longer term contextual thing. And then in terms of the different types of people within UX, we often use things called personas, and there's other alternative methods too. But you're probably familiar with personas in as much as they sort of represent effectively a type of person. And their goals and their needs. And again, that's different ways to look at the website, that it needs to work for all, whatever you've got, all 6 personas. Each of your web pages ideally sort of needs to talk to those. So that's partly how we can put some of this into practice and put some of our research into those journey maps and personas to better understand the people and then better design based on those.
Okay, so if it's quick and dirty, low value, volume sales, then it's CRO. And if it's a more complex, long term, higher value purchase, then people should be investing in user experience. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's not quite as black and white as that, but I think there's definitely some truth in it. I think even those who are doing the sort of quick and dirty type things, you still need to think about your users a bit and think about the context. And even just from a marketing angle, obviously, the more you understand the people you're trying to sell to, the easier it is to sell to them. So I think there's still value in doing that kind of user research, even if you have got that sort of quick and dirty website. But yeah, predominantly, if you're looking at sort of user experience as a whole, you want to be focusing more on the longer term and broader experience than necessarily someone just coming to a website and buying a cheap thing.
Okay. So now I'm thinking of like the giants like Amazon or Shopify or those kinds of businesses. They'll be investing in user experience to make sure people get on the journey from where they enter to the thing that they want to buy. They don't care particularly which thing that the user buys, so that might be interesting. Okay, I want to come to the second thing then, which is this user research, because it seems to me that this is cracked up to be, not egged up to be, cracked up to be. It's not all it's cracked up to be. So I think there's a scale which starts with me, so I know that's true, and then it goes all the way through to the social dilemma, where they had us believe that the social media platforms were making decisions for us on the fly in the instant. Do you know what I mean? Because they know us so well. Now, I've run a lot of digital marketing campaigns, a lot of websites, a lot, all of that stuff. I know what's available to me. And also I have businesses phone me up saying, do you want to know who's on your website? And then they give me an IP address, which is worse than useless, because now I'm cold calling a business like I was in 1992. So, so what I'm interested to know is how much information is actually available to us as marketer. Like me as a marketer, I know what I get, and maybe I'm not making the most of it. If you're engaged in user research, then you will know much more about what is available. I think that the danger with personas especially is that people just make stuff up about who they'd most like to walk into their website or their store. So, for example, my persona, my ideal client's Victoria Beckham. She comes in, she designs my whole service. That's the danger, is that so there's a number of questions. Well, there's the one question. Let's go with the one question. How much information is actually available? How much can you actually know about the people who are engaging with your website or your social media or wherever it is that you get that information from?
Yeah, I mean, your persona example is great, because I do see that a bit, and that's essentially bad personas that have just been thrown together. And that is almost the number one advert for doing proper user research, because if you're just pulling things together, then it's going to be fairly meaningless. But if it's based on solid research, if it's based on, get onto that in a second, but it's based on a lot of sort of different types of research, then they are going to be useful and relevant, and actually, what your users are actually thinking, feeling, doing, and how they're acting, and then you can use that information to be useful. But I think the main thing to talk about in terms of research is there's.
Can I just before you finish that, can I just give you the worst example ever of personas? I was doing some work with a co-working space at one point, and the marketing manager was tasked with coming up with these personas, and she came back with these 4 characters that were complete fiction. And I'm like, but these personas are walking around us all day, every day. Like, we could see that kind of person there, and that kind of person there, and that kind of person there. So even when, like, we're face to face with the people all day, every day, they still go away and completely make it up, So this persona thing is dangerous, I think. It's really dangerous. But sorry, I'm digressing.
No, it can be. I agree. And that, again, just comes back to, if the personas are based on actual research that's been done and verified, then they're not going to just be made up. So that's the point. I think if you've got personas, you really need to be looking at, how do we come about these, not just jumping to conclusions and making things up. But I think the main thing I was going to say is,
how do we come about those personas? How do we do that bit of the process well?
Yeah, so there's 2 types of research, essentially. There's quantitative research and qualitative research. So the quantitative is more around the numbers, if you like, so your website analytics. So you can dive into your website analytics, you can find out a fair bit about your people from that, in sort of large scale numbers. You can kind of find out the what, what they're doing, what they're looking at, that kind of thing, but what pages they're looking at, what path they're taking through the website, those kind of things perhaps. But you can't necessarily find out the why, and that's where the qualitative side of things comes in, where you're actually talking to people and you're delving into things a bit more, and you're finding out more about their overall experiences, possibly even including things like being off the website. But essentially you're getting that much more detailed kind of response there. And I think that's where, in research, that both is important, that you need that more sort of data-driven side of things, the more sort of quantitative side, looking at big numbers, market research type stuff as well, but also that more qualitative side of things, where we're actually talking to people and really understanding. So when you're doing user research, you're often asking why a lot. There's a technique called the 5 whys. So someone will say something and you'll say why, and they'll say something else and you said why, and basically you're really drilling down to the sort of core motivations behind that. And I think that is important, particularly for those more considered purchases or those more considered websites. You're really understanding the true motivations behind people doing things.
Okay, good. So it does go back to just old-fashioned talking to people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, projects I'm working at the moment, there's a lot of user interviews that go on with that, which is talking to people about, in one case, about their sort of training needs and what sort of training you're looking for, and why is that? How does that help you? And you learn loads from that, because you learn obviously those sort of needs and motivations, but you also learn the type of language they use, which is going to be really important to have on your website. So if people are saying certain terms a lot, then you want to make sure that your website and your website navigation reflects that. So yeah, you really need to be getting out there and talking to your users. And also that's where personas, in theory at least, and I'm a little bit dubious about personas, but where they can be useful is just reminding people who work in your organisation that your users aren't kind of users, they're real people with real needs and motivations and considerations, concerns, that kind of thing. And I think that, again, just helps design something that's going to work for them.
Yeah, I think the principle of personas is sound. I think the issue is when people just go about it in a completely half-assed way. It's like so much of what goes on in marketing and sales. Do you know what I mean? It's like, we could just bodge this, and then people just bodge it, and then it's worse than useless. The other one that gets me always is SWOT analysis, because everyone's really happy to sit around and talk about their strengths and weaknesses. Nobody wants strengths and opportunities. Nobody wants to talk about the opportunity, the threats and the weaknesses. So it just becomes a farce. Do you know what I mean? It's ridiculous. There's lots of that. And like, even people in sales conversations just not asking the question, like, is this going to be useful to you? Is this something you could be interested in? They just don't ask the question. Yeah. So I think sales and marketing misses it in a lot of instances like that with the personas. Okay. So it sounds to me then then you get broad brush, like what Google Analytics gives us is it gives us some interests, it gives us some, I can't remember what they call it. They call it markets, they call it, or something like that, like where they shop interests, like where they shop, if they're gardeners or mechanics or DIY, that sort of stuff. So you get that broad brush stuff kind of from their engagement with the website. If you want something qualitative, then you actually have to get into a conversation with people.
pretty
How
much.
easy is it to get into a conversation with somebody then if they are visiting your website?
So the way it tends to work is, well, there's a few different ways to recruit people for this kind of research, but normally if someone's taking part in, say, a user interview for us, they'll normally be paid for that or incentivized for that. So it'll be a case of, we'll be looking for someone who fits a certain demographic, has a certain need, and is essentially, a good representation of one of our core audiences. So going back to the university example, we might be looking at sort of 17, 18-year-olds who are thinking about which university to go for. We can then say, basically, we want to have a chat with you for 45 minutes. We'll pay you £50 for the privilege. And then say you can either do that through the website itself. So your university website, for example, you might have a thing that sort of pops up and says, do you want to take part in our in our feedback, or more often than not, we use sort of third-party recruitment companies. There are companies out there you can just say, we want to talk to 10, 18-year-olds who are considering going to universities in the south of England or whatever it might be, and then they'll go away and find those people for us, and then they'll take part in that conversation.
Good. Excellent. Yeah, so that makes sense then. So the question I have now then is how much bullshit was the social dilemma, really? Like, because they did literally, they had those three guys pretending to be things, and they're like, now we're going to do this, now we're going to do that, now we're going to do something else. Like, clearly they know a lot about us, but this is off topic, but I think it's a little bit like tobacco, where they convinced us all it was addictive, so none of us could give up smoking. They convinced us that social media is addictive, but then all of a sudden, when Facebook went to shit, we'll just stop using it like overnight. So it makes me wonder then, is there, if I were to go to Facebook and I say, okay, I want to commission a report into these kinds of people, who they are, where they are, those kinds of things, do we believe that the platforms are actually sitting on usable data like that? Could you go and pay Mark Zuckerberg an amount of money to find out a lot about you or me or somebody else, do you think?
I think you could definitely find out a lot about people, but whether it's that real, true, representation, that sort of true motivations behind doing things, how people really think about things, I don't know. Because the problem is people obviously lie a lot online. Particularly looking at social media, none of us are going to be posting photos of our, rainy bank holiday weekend. It's going to all be our lovely sunny holiday photos and that kind of thing. Our online personas are very different to our realities. So I think from that side of things, Facebook will know a lot. They'll know a lot about what we buy and things, which obviously won't necessarily be lies, but there's a lot of things that people do act differently in different circumstances, which is why when you're doing user research, you need to make sure that people are being really comfortable, they are being honest, they're not trying to give off any sort of different type of impression about themselves. That's why one of the things in UX is that we don't tend to do focus groups very much. So in marketing, you probably have focus groups for that sort of research, but in UX, we try not to do that because focus groups naturally lend themselves to people putting on a bit of a front, maybe, and sort of, if everyone else in the room says, oh, yeah, I really like that, you're not going to be the one person who says, oh, no, I hated it. So there's that kind of thing, which is why those sort of one-to-one chats that we do more of in UX are probably more valuable in terms of getting those honest responses.
Yeah, and if you've got someone for 45 minutes, arguably they're corrupted by the £50. I'm tempted, to tell you that I'm looking for a university. So there is that, but there's none of it is perfect. The quantitative is broad brush at best. The qualitative is always the thing about focus groups is people really like tea and biscuits. If you give them tea and biscuits, they'll tell you your stuff's nice. Do you know what I mean? It's that's the issue with the qualitative. And
but
so I think you.
Just sort of on that one, that's a lot of essentially why user research is a bit more detailed than that, because there's a real art to those conversations. It's not just having a chat to someone for an hour, you really need to be making sure you're not asking leading questions, or you're not just letting them give simple answers of just like, oh yes, that was nice or whatever. You really need to be understanding. So one thing that I'll ask people, you might ask someone, oh, did you understand what was on that web page, or was it clear to you? Well, that's not a great question, because they'll probably just say yes. But if you ask them, okay, can you explain to me what you've read on that web page, or can you tell me what you found there, then they can't kind of rely on that. They have to then say, oh yeah, well, it's about this and it's about that. And so it's all about how you ask those questions. And other ones are about sort of future and past behaviour. So if I asked you, well, should our website be an app? Would you use this app? You'd probably say, well, yeah, maybe. Whereas if I said, have you used any apps like that before? Have you previously actually done that in real life? You might well say no. So it's all these little techniques, the way you ask questions and what you ask people, really key to getting the sort of honest and truthful responses.
Yes. And I'm trying to remember what it's called, but you can put in questions that kind of balance each other to test the accuracy of the answers and those things.
Definitely, yeah, and that's surveys, which is a whole other area of potential confusion and misleading people. But yeah, that's another example in that you can almost ask, if it's a long survey, you can almost ask the same kind of question twice in slightly different ways at different points, and then see if there's a big gap between what people are saying on both. They're probably not
Yes.
actually taking it seriously. So
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Are you ready for some good news?
yeah,
I think you're qualified to talk to us about user experience and user research.
good. That's a relief. Pass the first test.
You passed the first test. You've answered the first question. You've answered the first question. Okay, good. So that brings us then to question number 2, which is, who do you work with? You've given us a sense. There's universities in there. There was another type of business that you told us that's in there. Who do you work with? How do you add value to their lives? That's what I'm interested to know. What I'm really interested to know is, how much value do you add to their lives? What is the value of investing in this?
Oh, some great questions there. So the first, to answer the first one quickly, I work with pretty much everyone. So I've worked with uh, dressmakers, bodybuilders, hen parties, stag do's, kids, pensioners, everyone across the board. In terms of sectors, say finance, charity, e-commerce, education, you name it, there's probably some sort of website that I've worked with in my very long career. So that, I think, is a lot of why I'm still doing what I do, because it's really interesting to have that side of things. Most of my career has been agency side, and I've worked with agencies who might specialise a bit in one or two areas, but generally speaking, there's not an agency that's going to kind of turn down work. So we get all sorts of requests from all sorts of different companies, organisations of different sizes. So real mix in terms of who I work with.
Okay. So what does the value of the website have to look like before somebody picks up the phone and says, I need to have a conversation with Luke Hay? Like, where does the website have to have got to before it's worth having a conversation with you?
It's not so much where the website is, it's more what they want to achieve and what they want to do. So it might be that, and often a good time is someone's thought, well, I do need to redesign my website, we need to almost start again, so we need to get some understanding in there. Or it might be that, it's from the e-commerce side, conversion rates are low, or it might be that, for university, applications might be down, that kind of thing. So generally speaking, most of the time people get in touch when there is a drop-off in performance one way or another. But that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. It might be that someone's launched a new product. It might be that actually things are seemingly going okay, but there's always room for improvement. Or even just that they've had bad feedback. It might be that their customer support team's getting a lot of calls because people are getting really lost on their website, or really frustrated by it, or that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of different scenarios where people can get in touch.
But it would have to be an established website. It would have to be a website that was attracting traffic and
Not necessarily, because if you were, let's say you were a startup and you had a completely new product, then there's the more sort of generative user research. So user research is can be split into generative and evaluative. So evaluative is like looking at a website, kind of finding out what's wrong with it, obviously talking to users to help understand that. But there's the more generative side of things, which is about sort of generating ideas and understanding what people want and what people need. So on that side of things, someone could come to me and say, "Well, I want to kind of know if there is a market for this particular product," and then you have the same kind of conversations with people. You talk to them about things. You might look at competitor websites if there's anything else out there, but you wouldn't have to base your user research on an existing website.
Right. I'm such an idiot because I just assume that people go out and screw this up before they think about doing it correctly. But there are people with a plan out there, aren't there? They just think, how
Most
do I
people
do
do
this
that, but
right?
yeah,
Stuff.
in
Most
and it's
people.
tricky, of course. It's tricky, of course, because a lot of the time, particularly if you are a complete startup starting from scratch, you're not going to have necessarily the budget to do these things. But then, I'm going to drop this quote in here, which drop in at some point. That there's a quote which is, "If you think good design's expensive, you should see the cost of bad design." So it's
Yeah.
basically the idea that if you don't build the right thing, you don't build it in the right way, then it's going to fail and it's going to cost you a fortune. Whereas if you invest a little bit up front and make sure what you're building is right for the users, that there is a market for it, that they understand it and they can use it, then it's going to be profitable. So that to some extent answers your next question really about how you show value is by making sure that what people are building, whether it's building from scratch or improving on their current website, is actually going to work for the people using it and is going to be a successfully performing site or app.
Okay, good. Are you ready for another challenging question?
Go for it.
It appears to me, it feels to me like there was a point in time around 2014, 2015 where all of the web designers rebranded themselves as UX consultants or people.
Yeah.
Is that what happened, or was there something else going on?
Yeah, that's sort of what happened. So some of those people who rebranded themselves did it in the right way, because there is the difference between a web designer and a UX designer is, as the name suggests, really, that the UX designer is invested in understanding the user experience. They're considering the user experience. They're probably basing their design decisions on research, on understanding what their users want and need. Whereas a web designer could just be building a website on their own without any of that kind of input, and nothing sort of to inform their designs other than either trying to sell more stuff or just whatever looks nicest. So there isn't like a dividing line between you're a UX designer or a web designer, but UX certainly should be some sort of involvement from understanding what the user needs are, and being involved in that process of both understanding to begin with and then evaluating your design against user requirements. So I think it was obviously a temptation for people just to call themselves UX designers, even if they weren't necessarily changing how they went about things. But I think a lot of people do, and particularly these days, you wouldn't get away with calling yourself a UX designer really if you weren't pretty heavily involved in the UX side of things and understanding your users.
Okay, good. All right then. So that's good. It definitely happened. I remember, like everyone I knew was a web
Mm.
designer suddenly turned up as a UX consultant.
Yeah.
So the next question then is, what kind of efficiencies can be achieved, or what kind of outcomes can be achieved, can be changed by investing in UX?
So it does come back to building the right thing for the right people. So if you have a website that is even just easy to use, that's going to be more efficient and can make more money, if that's the ultimate aim for it, than one that's going to be really difficult to use. So even things like looking at the information architecture of a website and the navigation, so how people find their way around, that's obviously really key. If people get lost or disorientated or confused by your website, then they're not going to use it. They're not going to buy from you, or they're not going to donate to you, or they're not going to sign up to your courses, whatever it might be. So I think by making sure things do work for people, and that's again more on the evaluative side of research, then that you're in a better place. So, to take an example of sort of usability testing on a website, and there's an existing established website, we'll get people to try and do some tasks on it, some things that you'd expect people to do, buy a thing, sign up for an account, find information on X, Y, and Z, see how they do that, and then see where people go wrong or get confused along that path, and then make suggestions of how that can be fixed. And then it's kind of that simple, that you're fixing the problems, people don't have that problem, and then they're able to go on and convert one way or another through the site.
Okay, so what are the metrics that you're interested in? Is it time on the site? Is it conversion? Is it repeat visitors? Or not you necessarily, but people when they come to look, what are they interested in?
Yeah, so I'm going to say it depends, which I've probably said a lot and will say a lot, but it depends a lot on the circumstances. Obviously, conversion rate one way or another is going to be a big deal for a lot of people. But again, if you're that university, then people aren't going to convert, and they're not just going to come and apply for your course on their first visit to the site. So you're looking for those engagement signals as well. So time on site is one, but time on site is very difficult, because that could be a good or bad thing. If someone's coming to your website and they're looking to find out a single piece of information, and then they go away and they've done what they wanted to do and they've gone away happy, then that might take them 30 seconds. That might be a good thing. Whereas if someone's really taking their time and really browsing things and reading things, then a long time on site can be a good thing. So you have to look at all of this in context. You have to look at that really for individual pages rather than websites as a whole. You have to look at maybe things like scroll depth as well. You need to look at other kind of different types of conversions that are going on. And really, there definitely isn't one single metric. I think that's the main thing, that it's lots of metrics, and also some things that aren't metrics, some things that aren't easy to measure with analytics alone.
Okay, good. So this kind of bleeds in, I would imagine, because you were at Fresh Egg, weren't you, for a while? Like
That's
Fresh
right.
Egg is a big agency success story from the South Coast. I would imagine, well, okay, let's put it this way. Google would have us believe that these kinds of metrics that you're talking about, scroll depth, time on site, repeat visitors, they would have us believe that this is all informing search engine optimization. Is that are you seeing that when you spend time with a site, if they implement your proposals, if they have the effect, is it having a ranking effect for your customers?
It's a really difficult one to measure. So in theory, you're absolutely right that Google do keep saying that basically user experience, whatever that means for them, but user experience is a big ranking factor. That basically, if your website works well for people, then it will rank better than a similar sort of site that doesn't. But of course, there's so many different factors that go into ranking. It's hard to know what sort of impact that has. It's also pretty much impossible for Google to really measure user experience, because the whole point of user experience is it is a difficult thing to measure. There are those sort of signals that you get, but that doesn't necessarily mean a lot. Like I say, is from Google's point of view, is someone spending a long time on a website a good thing or a bad thing? It could be that someone's lost and they're looking around for ages for something, and that's why they're there a long time. Or it could be that they're actually really engaged and really detailed and in depth. A bounce from a website could be a good thing if they give the right search result and people land on the page they want to be on, and then they get the information they want and leave. That can be a good thing. Whereas it might be they're in the wrong place and they leave. So this is where I think that Google are sort of saying the right things, but it's really difficult for them to actually put that into practice. I can't really see how you can without having that bit more in-depth knowledge of users and their behaviour.
Yes, and they would also have us believe that they know absolutely everything about us. I don't know if they do. I'm not really a Google fan, and I'm especially not now they took that 80 quid off me. I won't give it back to me. I'm not a Google fan.
Gotta let it go.
It's interesting what you're saying, isn't it? Because the other thing is then they're busy cannibalizing the search, like with snippets and stuff, so people don't even have to
Yeah.
go to the website anymore. They're
Mm.
literally stealing people's content and IP and presenting it to people without them needing to go to the website. And then the other thing that's going on around search, I mean, it's current now. It's probably going to be 6 weeks before I post this one because I've got a few recorded. But this AI and ChatGPT and all of these things, do you see that? How do you see that impacting the web? Like, because they've incorporated it into Bing and it's gone mental at people. Um, how do you see that kind of evolving the situation?
There's a question. I mean, if I could give a confident answer to that one, then I'd be a very rich man indeed. I I don't know is the answer, but it does definitely seem like things have really taken a big step in that direction. You know, things have really changed, even in the last few months. And I think from an SEO point of view, as you mentioned before, you know, that seems to be probably something that's going to be a big impact there because, you know, the algorithms of AI will probably be able to kind of understand Google's algorithms as well as, you know, a human can, if not better. So, you know, could AI sort of just optimize your website? Could it write content for you that it knows is going to rank well? You know, there's a lot of sort of SEO content that's still written these days that actually could just be written by AI. And obviously, there's all sorts of problems about whether that's accurate or true. But you know, if it's bashing out things that might actually help your website rank, then I think it's going to have a big impact on SEO. From a user research perspective, and I would say this, but I don't think it'll have that much impact because if you're doing user research properly, again, you really need to understand people quite deeply. You really need to understand what their fears and goals and motivations are, and you really need to get to the bottom of things rather than just that surface level side of data that you know AI and Google have available. So I'm less concerned about my job than I would be if I was working in something like you know producing content for big websites where you know it might be able to AI might be able to replicate that, albeit possibly badly.
Yes, I think badly. I mean, the thing is that the ChatGPT can build your website, populate the website with content, go and visit other people's websites, do all sorts of things, you know. So the danger is that the whole thing just becomes AI talking to AI. I
Mhm.
remember how excited I got when they said that Google Assistant was going to be able to phone up and book you a hairdressing appointment. I'm like, amazing, cold calling. But immediately you have an AI cold calling. They'll make an AI to handle the calls, and this is just what's going to go on. It's just going to be computers talking to each other all day, every day.
Yeah.
It is mad. It is absolutely mad. I've had to put my headphones in because we've got a tropical storm going on here, which means I'm hearing myself twice, which is grossly unpleasant.
Okay. Is that better now with headphones?
Well, I can hear you at least, but I can also hear me about 8 frames behind what I'm saying. It's a bit
Ah.
distracting. Okay, good. So, feels to me like we've got to question number 3.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about that?
Sounds good to me. Bring it on.
Okay, so the last 3 questions are typically very short. This one
Mm-hmm.
especially, because the idea is if you can answer us within a minute, then we'll chop it up and put it on TikTok. That's what we'll do. That's your reward if you get it below a minute.
I
So the
don't think I've been
question
on
is,
TikTok before.
you've not been on TikTok.
I didn't think so, no. So it'd be a first.
Okay, well we have to do it yet, so don't get too excited.
All right.
You have to come in under a minute. We have to edit it. We have to post it. You know, there's a few steps left before you blow up on TikTok. Okay, cool. So the question is, what's your recommendation for anyone who is maybe you could answer twice? Let's do this.
Mm-hmm.
So the first question is, in a minute, what's your recommendation for anyone who's looking to get better at or do better with their user experience?
Okay. So first thing is to talk to people who work in UX and user research and find out more about them and their techniques and things. If you've got people in your company, then you can talk to them and find out more, sit in on their user interviews and things. And then the other tip really is to actually get out there yourself and talk to your users, whether that's user interviews or usability testing. But the more you can get to know them and what they really want from your website or your product, the better you're going to be at then designing and building things for them. So yeah, talk to your users is the short answer there.
Fantastic. Now, and I think you came in under a minute, so we might be 20% on the way of you blowing up on TikTok. So then the next question, but I think you might have answered it already as well, is what's your recommendation for anyone who's looking to get better with user research?
Mm.
You
That
answered it, didn't
is,
you?
yeah, pretty much the same answer, I think, really. Yeah, I think it is all about talking to your users, but also, say genuinely, if you work at a company where you've got a user research team, they'll be really happy if you also, let's say you work in marketing and you want to know more about what the user research team are doing, just go and talk to them, because user researchers really like talking about what they do. They like talking about what they do and what they found out about their users. So if someone from marketing department in my company came to me and said, "Oh, I'd really like to learn more about that," go and stroke their egos a bit and say, "Oh, I realise what you're doing is really important. Go and find out more." Then the researcher will be able to give you a load of information about your users that you probably don't know already. That will probably be really useful for marketing, let alone for designing and building things for them.
So are these teams siloed typically? User experience aren't in the pocket of marketing, and marketing aren't in the pocket of user experience.
I mean, I'd say in a lot of cases they're enemies, as well as being siloed. The two things, and that's what I've tried to. I run a course at Brighton SEO, a training course on UX for marketers, and a lot of that is about kind of trying to bring the two together. Trying to create a beautiful relationship between UX and marketing, because at the moment they are quite different. Marketing tends to be quite profit driven, tends to be about getting the most traffic to a website, tends to be about that kind of thing, whereas UX people tend not to really care about those. They care about people having a good experience and enjoying using their website and liking the design and that kind of thing. And I think there should be a lot more crossover, because ultimately, if I'm you know responsible for building a really great website, but no one's coming to it, then what's the point? So you need marketing to help drive that traffic. And also, from the other side, from the profitability side of things, is you could build a lovely, usable website, but actually, if no one's converting or no one's coming to it to use it, then again, what's the point? So I think that definitely UXers need to have a bit more of a marketing hat on at times, and I think marketers need to have a bit more of a UX hat on as well.
This is the other thing that frazzles my mind about sales and marketing. And now I'm thinking maybe nobody likes marketing. Maybe it's marketing the issue. But sales and marketing are always at war. Now you're telling me marketing and UX people are at war. You think
Yeah.
marketing people will be falling over themselves to get in and get this information?
Absolutely, yeah. Because there's so much you learn from the marketing in terms of, if you're marketing someone and you understand what they really need, what they want, what their challenges are at the moment, all of these things that we get through doing this user research, it's so useful. There's so much that we've done in terms of user research for designing a website that then has been passed on to marketing teams and has then formed part of their campaigns, even, or part of how they approach targeting audiences. So yeah, I'm not going to disagree with that, obviously, but yeah, I think definitely marketing people should be getting more involved on the user research side and definitely taking the output and insights from it.
It is ridiculous, is what it is. It really is ridiculous. Okay, good. Okay, so that brings us then to question number 4. Question number
Right.
4 is, what should people read, or what content should they consume? Are you a reader or are you a content consumer?
I used to be more of a reader than I am. I don't know whether that's a shortening of attention span over the years, but yeah, I read bits, but yeah, consume content in various ways these days as well. So what sort of people are we talking about? Classic user research, answering a question with a question, but what kind of people are you thinking of here, Martin?
Well, we are thinking of people who've just sat and listened through an hour of you and I talking about user experience and user research. So they've sat through an hour and 9 minutes and 53 seconds to be precise. What do you think they would benefit from reading or consuming?
Okay, so we talk about people who've been inspired to learn more, through our great conversation. They've been inspired to learn more about UX and want to take that next step. And yeah, coming it from, I guess, so your audience is going to be, marketers or people with interest in marketing primarily. So I'd say the really good starting point still, I think, is the book you mentioned right at the start, Don't Make Me Think, as a really good sort of just basic introduction to UX and understanding what it is and why it's important. Very sort of simple book. You can just pick up and read it in one sitting almost. That's pretty straightforward. There's another couple of old books as well that I think are still really valid. So there's one called Simple and Usable, um, which is really pretty old in terms of the where we are in the web today, but the principles behind it are still really strong, and it's a really nice introduction to designing things that work for people. Another one along those lines, which is another very old book, is The Design of Everyday Things as well by Don Norman. So yeah, there's some older books to read. Obviously, people want to read my book as well, which is around analytics and user research. So it's part of a user research series, and it's the analytics version of that. So again, I'm half joking because it is slightly out of date now with the GA changes coming, but I think that should give people a bit of an understanding of why analytics is important and how that can feed into the UX process. But there's lots of other mediums out there as well. So the Nielsen Norman group have a website, NN Group, and they send out a monthly newsletter, a weekly newsletter even, I think, which has got some really nice articles about all different types of UX that are always really interesting and yeah, worth a read. And then there's podcasts. So my agency, Clearleft, have a really strong podcast series of various different types of UX as well. So that's, I think, something for everyone there, really, a bit of a mix of things.
Super cool. Excellent. Okay, good. I didn't mention your book in the introduction. I knew you'd written a
That's
book
all
and I
right.
didn't mention it. I'm sorry, man. I'm gutted that I missed that.
I got my own plug in there. It's fine. No, as I say, genuinely, it is worth reading, but with the caveat that Google Analytics 4 coming out, things have been a little bit outdated on that. So yeah, just I guess that's a whole other thing. That's a whole other book probably that I need to write now. GA4's out there.
And we probably need to have a conversation about GA4 because
Hmm.
I can't be asked. I should
So
know
it's
about it.
really funny you say that. It's really
Yeah.
funny you say that because that is exactly my position until about maybe a month ago when I thought, oh no, I probably need to be asked because it's kind of my job. But yeah, for
Yeah.
so long, I was just like, oh, I've got my head into GA, I understand it, I know it back to front, I can use it to get exactly what I need from it. And now you've just brought out this whole new thing, which is completely different. So I'm actually at the moment writing a blog post for the people who publish my book around sort of getting started with GA4 from a UX perspective, because I think there is a steep learning curve, but I think like all of these things, if you know how to go about it and where to start, it's a lot easier. So I'm now getting to a point with it where I actually understand it, I think, and quite like it. So yeah, hopefully there'll be some tips in there in how other people like yourself can get started with it without having to watch hours and hours of tutorial videos or whatever else there might be out there.
Yeah. The thing is, it's not my job and I'm
Mm.
only managing my own websites. And I really don't care if people come or
No.
otherwise. I'm interested in the YouTube channel. We're making investments there, but the website really,
Mm.
I'm not particularly interested or excited. And the thing is, I probably speak for a lot of people when I
Mm.
say I don't want to learn a new thing. Thank you very much, Google. You know what? Just
Yeah.
what I've got is working. Just this is a big issue in digital marketing. Is some dweeb at Google or Facebook or whatever decide something needs to change, they change it
Hmm.
universally, and I'm sure they lose a lot of people every single time.
Yeah, I think so, but I think again they'll have thought it through. They'll have thought of the pros and cons. A lot of it does tie in with Google products as well. So there's elements of this that are obviously aimed at the marketing side and at Google Ads and that kind of thing too. So there's an element of that. This might help them to improve that product. There's things you can do in GA4 around audiences that cross over to your advertising campaigns as well. So there's an element of that even though GA4 is still free technically, there is still a bit of a tool that might drive people towards the ad side. So that might be a motivation for them doing it, but
Well,
it's
the
not for
thing
me
is,
to
I think
say.
anyone who's seriously invested has to go, but anyone like me who's kind of on the
Hmm.
edge isn't going to go. And I'm going to take issue. I don't think they have thought it through. I don't think they've spoken to a single user. That would be my guess.
Well, possibly not. Yeah, possibly not. I mean, yeah, I'm not going to defend it because I certainly was in your position and still to some extent am of actually, it's just another headache that I could kind of do without having to relearn the whole thing. But there are reasons behind it. There's also data privacy reasons. The way Universal GA was collecting data was, not great from that side of things. GA4 was perhaps a bit better in terms of anonymising data and that side. So there's quite a lot behind it, but as you say, have they done the user research into who's actually using it and why they're using it? And as you say, it almost feels like, and maybe they have, maybe they've made a conscious decision that they don't care about, the sort of smaller businesses or people who aren't that invested, and really they're building a tool more for people who do really care about their analytics. Because of course, it's a free tool, so they're not, frankly, they're not really losing a lot if people like yourself don't use it. Even though it's pain in the arse, as you say.
It is a pain in the ass, and I will bet you a packet of polos they haven't spoken to a single user. This is where we've got
Hmm.
to in 2023, where the geeks think that they're too clever to have to talk to people. So the refreshing
Yeah.
thing in this conversation is that it's enforced my feeling that the data that's being collected by these platforms is a pretty blunt instrument, and it's
Mm.
reinforced my faith in humanity that actually the best thing you can do is still speak to somebody. So
Definitely. Yeah.
that's how I'm feeling about this conversation. And I will bet you a packet of polos they haven't spoken to a single user because they think they're cleverer than everyone. And it'll be a train smash when it goes live and everyone has to go, and it'll be a whole scenario soap
I think,
opera.
as you say, I think just people stop using it probably, and yeah, I don't know what that impact that'll have on Google generally because I don't know how much benefit there is, but yeah, I think they seem to just be ploughing ahead with it regardless of everyone saying, "Oh, yeah, I don't know about this." Um, but
Yeah,
we'll
but
see.
you
We'll
know
find
what
out.
they say. What they say is if you're not paying, you're the product. You don't pay for
Yeah.
Google Analytics because your website is the product. It's a data capture for Google. So it has value to them. But they're a long way away from the company that we all fell in love with in 2004.
They certainly are. Yeah.
They certainly are. They took my 80 quid.
Ugh. Gotta
Good.
let it go.
Okay. So now, because we went on that little diatribe, we're going to
Hmm.
run over by a couple of minutes. Are we still cool?
That's fine. Yeah, fine with me.
Okay, great. So all that's left then is for me to check in with you and see how you're feeling about your experience having appeared on the Talk Marketing Show.
It's been fun. It's a light grilling, but fun with it. It's been a really good chat. It's really always really interesting to talk to someone from kind of slightly different backgrounds and things in terms of the marketing side. And yeah, just really interesting to get your thoughts from the other side of things. So no, enjoyed myself. It's been nice.
Fantastic. You might have got one or two more challenging questions than most people get, I think. But yeah, it's because you're working with the dark side. You're working with the platforms. You're not working with them. You're working in that area. I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know.
I guess. I guess, but no, I'm working on the users side. That's the side I'm on.
Yes, you're working for the users. That's the place to be. Good.
Absolutely.
Okay, the reason I'm checking in, obviously, is because now I'm going to ask you. Sorry, it stopped raining. I can take these out and stop hearing the echo in my ears. Although, is it going to happen instantly? How's that?
Good.
Did I do it too early? Speakers. Hello? Say something.
Okay, I can hear you okay.
Right, I'm back on these. I have to hear myself
Yeah.
echoing. Okay, good. So, what I'm going to do is ask you to throw a couple of people under the bus who you think might be of interest to my tiny, tiny audience and also enjoy to have a conversation like this with me. And they need to be people you can introduce me to.
Okay. So, are you looking for anyone in particular, or because I mean I know quite a lot of people in terms of different disciplines and things. I mean, are you looking for fellow UX people, or?
It's universe led. So that's what I like about this is I've got no idea who you think is going to be interesting and of use to my audience. So it's nice where it kind of goes. I speak to a UX person, they introduce me to other UX people. That's cool. Or they just say this person's got some really interesting ideas. It's completely up to you. Who do you think will be of interest?
Okay, well, I think there are a couple of UX people who spring to mind first of all. So there's my colleague at Clearleft, Chris Howe, who's head of experience there. So he's got a handle on sort of UX, but more across the board than me. So I'm more on the research side, but he's equally happy on the design side of things as well. There's Tom Pryor, who works a lot with UX and business. So going back to some of the things that we spoke about before, he's looking to, I guess, help UX people get more of a business head on, and not just be focusing purely on the users, but actually make them more sort of commercial and more aware of how businesses work, rather than necessarily just perhaps naively, as some of us do, trying to do the best for users at the detriment of the actual business objectives. So he's interesting from that side of things. And then Callum Grantham, who's content director, I believe, but he's just really interesting in terms of the content space. Again, content is something that UX is really important with, and Callum's someone who kind of gets that and looks at things from the user's perspective, how to produce the best content based on sort of user research and user needs. So he's an ex-colleague of mine from Fresh Egg Days. So those three, is that enough?
That's plenty. That really is plenty. I mean, typically, if you can make some sort of LinkedIn kind of introduction, then I'll pick it up from there. But typically, if people recommend two, one of them will come along. So maybe I'll get 1.5 of these.
See how you go.
Super cool. This has been really interesting. I've been wanting to have a conversation about this for a long time because I am wondering if it's just me being an idiot and not being able to access these reams of data that are available to vicious, nasty, hideous marketers and advertisers as according to the social dilemma, or if it's just nonsense. And I think I'm veering towards the nonsense again now.
I'd like to think so. I think, yeah, it's less sinister, isn't it? I think there's, as I say, there's lots of data out there, and it can be used to manipulate people. But to truly understand people and what they really want and what they really need, then you do need to put the effort in and do proper user research and actually talk to people.
And this is it exactly. This is why Facebook's going down the toilet, because they don't actually talk to people. That's
they don't understand what people want, particularly seemingly the sort of younger generation. That seems to be the main loss from Facebook, and it's definitely gone downhill since. And also, there's always someone else coming along. That's the thing I remember. Obviously, Twitter's in a bit of an odd place at the moment, anyway. But I remember the old CEO of Twitter, or even the founder of Twitter, sort of someone asked him, how long are you going to be relevant for? How long are you going to be around for? And he said, well, until something better comes along. And I think that's something that you forget as well, that, you're only as good as, you are compared to your competitors. So,
Yeah.
enjoy the success while it lasts, because you need to stay ahead, and definitely UX can be a differentiator on that as well. You can be, if you have a good user experience, that can give you a competitive advantage, in my opinion.
Okay. And that's what I think about Facebook, is they had the nectar. They had all of us talking about all of us, and we were interested in that. And then they decided they know better than we do what we're interested in, and the whole thing went off a cliff. Literally, that's what happened. And there's no way back. And the better thing than Facebook is, of course, TikTok. It's buried. Yeah.
Yeah. I need to get onto that.
You should. All the cool kids are there, man. You need to get there before their mums get there. Okay, well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for reaching out, man. I have wanted to have this conversation for a long time. It's really refreshing to hear that talking to people is the answer, because I like that a lot.
Good. Excellent. Well, I hope it's been interesting. As I say, it's been a good chat for me too.
Fantastic. I really hope it has been interesting for the people who's listening. It's been interesting for me. Thank you so much, man.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for taking the time to check out this episode of the Talk Marketing Show. If you found this interesting and useful, then YouTube thinks you're going to enjoy this one. And this is the latest thing that we've posted. If you haven't yet, and you could take a second to like, share, subscribe, and comment, then that will give us the motivation to continue on this epic journey.